Welcome to this morning's press briefing. I'm Tom Gibson, President and CEO of the American Iron and Steel Institute. AISI serves as the voice of the North American steel industry in the public policy arena and advances the case for steel in the marketplace as the preferred material of choice. Together, our member companies represent over 80% of both U.S. and North American steel capacity. Participating in today's press briefing are AISI Chairman Dan D'Amico, who's Chairman, President, and CEO of Nucor Corporation, AISI Vice Chairman Mario Longhi, who is President and CEO of Gerdau Ameristeel, AISI Director John Surma, who is Chairman and CEO of the United States Steel Corporation, and AISI Vice Chairman Regulo Salinas, who is the Vice President of Ternium Mexico. AISI Chairman Dan D'Amico will kick things off by commenting briefly on the latest industry data. Dan will also touch on our policy priorities for 2011. Then each participant will offer his thoughts on some of the industry's policy priorities. After those opening comments, I'll open the floor to Q&A. We do have one request. Please remember before asking your question to give your name and news organization. Thank you. With that, I'll turn it over to Dan.
Thank you, Tom. As we approach mid-2011, we are seeing positive signs that the economy continues on a slow but steady recovery. Steel shipments were approximately 22 million tons in the first quarter of 2011. We expect to see a strengthening of demand for the second quarter and in the second half of the year. The estimate is for shipments of 95 million tons for 2011, which would be an increase of roughly 14% over the 83 million tons the industry shipped in 2010. Domestic capacity utilization rose to 75% in the first quarter, a 5% improvement from the first week of January, similar to the positive improvement experienced in the first quarter of 2010. Finished import market share is currently at 21%, the same level as in 2009 and 2010. However, the most recent steel import monitoring and analysis data for the month of March recorded a sharp rise in finished imports to the highest level since January of 2009. We are urging the government to remain vigilant against any surges of unfair trade that could harm the recovery. This year, AISI has identified several policy priorities I'd like to touch on. Safety continues to be a top priority for our industry. AISI members place the highest priority on occupational health and safety matters because it is imperative that our highly valued workers remain safe and healthy. The AISI Occupational Health and Safety Committee is comprised of OHS leadership personnel of our member companies and meets several times per year to review the key ways to maximize safety and minimize the occurrence of incidents at our steel mills. Our companies continue to work through AISI to exchange information and best practices to meet our shared goal of improving occupational safety and health. The steel industry shares the federal government's policy priority to ensure worker safety and health at industrial workplaces. In that regard, our industry's experience has demonstrated that cooperative efforts among company management, employees, and the government are the most effective means to maximize safety and health. AISI supports a strong pro-manufacturing strategy that will assist U.S. manufacturers in competing in today's global economy. Our primary focus in support of that is to see government avoid excess regulation that reduces industrial competitiveness. Second, keep trade laws strong and strictly enforced. There is no substitution for rules-based and enforced free trade. Address China's currency manipulation and other trade-distorting policies. And finally, encourage incentives for the development and deployment of energy efficiency and breakthrough technologies. At this point, I would like to ask Mario if he would touch on our energy policy perspective. Mario?
Thank you, Dan. Good morning, everyone. Let's discuss energy for a moment, which for the steel industry offers both opportunities and challenges. Opportunity stems from the fact that the energy sector at present is a strong source of steel demand, and it is expected to remain strong throughout the decade. Whether you're talking about oil pipelines or offshore drilling, natural gas extraction and transport, clean coal, nuclear power, wind, solar, you name it, every one of those requires steel and large amounts of it. This sector represents 7% of steel demand. So, along with the continuing resurgence in the automotive sector, the energy sector is an important market to keep your eye on. It's essential that we make all these sources of energy part of the nation's energy independence strategy. In particular, we believe natural gas is a strategic domestic resource that can help drive economic recovery. Government policy should support the further development of shale natural gas resources, not discourage it. Our climate and energy policy must take into account our international competitors and how the cost of compliance with government policy can alter the competitive balance in the marketplace. EPA regulation of greenhouse gases from stationary sources under the Clean Air Act harms the competitiveness of domestic manufacturing, shifting American jobs and emissions to unregulated nations. Congress must act to prevent this misguided plan from undermining our efforts to promote economic growth and job creation. The steel industry in the U.S. has achieved a 30% reduction in energy intensity per ton of steel produced since 1990, which makes us a global leader as compared to steel industries in other nations. The challenge now, however, is that to continue to make further reductions will require completely new technologies. Governments in some other nations are actively helping to fund R&D into these breakthrough technologies, while the U.S. lags far behind. We believe government incentives to further energy efficiency goals should be part of an effective national energy policy. In conclusion, we need to adopt an energy policy that promotes development of cost-competitive domestic energy sources, provides incentives for industrial energy efficiency projects and research into breakthrough technologies, and avoids unilateral regulation of greenhouse gases by the EPA. Thank you, and John will now make a few comments about our industry perspective on trade policy. John?
Take the mic. Thanks, Nancy. And thank you, Mario. In order to strengthen our economy and competitiveness, we need a healthy and growing manufacturing sector. Our government's approach to trade policy is critical to our ability to support this goal. Our priorities are to expand rules-based trade, keep strong our trade laws against unfair trade and injurious surges, strictly enforce trade agreements, and combat Chinese currency manipulation and other protectionist foreign government policies. The fact is, U.S. steelmakers and our employees can compete with anyone in the world on a level playing field, but we cannot compete against governments, and we shouldn't have to. That's why strong U.S. anti-dumping and countervailing duty laws provide essential discipline against unfair trade. China's steel industry, of course, remains virtually all government-owned and controlled and heavily subsidized. On the currency front, we continue to urge Congress to pass legislation to address China's currency undervaluation, which gives their exports a built-in and unfair competitive advantage. For nearly a decade, past administrations have had endless diplomatic negotiations with China about allowing its currency to float, without success. It is time for the Congress to act to support American jobs and communities by passing the Currency Reform for Fair Trade Act. Thank you. I'll now turn things over to Regula.
Thank you, John. The perspective that Dan shared earlier regarding slow but steady recovery for the U.S. steel industry is also true for the NAFTA region. We saw a strengthening in demand occur last year, and now in 2011, we are seeing continued growth. In Mexico, for example, shipments were over 80 million tons in 2010, with 20 million tons expected for this year. That will bring us back to the level of achievements prior to the global recession. Overall, economic growth in Mexico is expected to be in the range of 4 to 5%. The automotive market, and particularly automotive exports, has been a solid source of steel demand. Construction, however, continues to lag throughout the NAFTA region. Because of the common need for updating and repairing infrastructure in the NAFTA countries, there are plans developing for a NAFTA-wide infrastructure conference tentatively titled The Roadway to North American Competitiveness, NAFTA Critical Infrastructure, Status, Challenges, and Opportunities. It is scheduled to be held in Washington, D.C. on June 7th. A recent positive accomplishment that reflects the collaborative role that the NAFTA steel industry has been able to play in the promoting pro-manufacturing policies is our completion and transmission of a letter to the 3 NAFTA countries' leaders signed by the presidents of the 3 major North American manufacturing organizations. Among other things, it represents recognition on the part of the 3 major manufacturing organizations, NAM, the Canadian Manufacturers, and CONCAMIN, of a still positive role in promoting pro-manufacturing policies and cross-border cooperation. The letter urges the 3 leaders to use the next Leaders Summit to direct ministers and senior officials to work with industry to identify priority measures that will strengthen industrial competitiveness within our countries and throughout our region. With that, I will turn it back to Tom Gibson. Thank you.
Thank you, Regulo. We'll now take questions, alternating between one in the room and one on the phone. Please state your name and news organization before your question. Chris?
Yeah, I have a question. Chris Davis with SBB. I believe it was Mario that mentioned the shale gas exploration and how that can be a growth sector for you guys. Could you elaborate on that, and maybe each of the CEOs could touch on that, and how you see that being an opportunity?
Well, certainly, Chris. You know, you can look at the amount of reserves that have been found and the potential that it has to further enhance our ability to be more in control of this crucial source of input to our businesses and for the country. It's going to require significant investment in the ability to extract and then to transport that gas to the consumption sources. And that will also help balance the energy generation that's going to come from it being less dependent on oil, coal, or other sources.
Question on the phone?
Okay, if you have a question, press *1 on your telephone keypad. Your first question comes from Joe Innes from Platts. Your line is now open.
Yes, hello, gentlemen. I'm sorry I can't be there, but it's good to hear you all. And my question is, we heard from Mario about energy demand, and automotive has been pretty solid, manufacturing pockets, I guess. But your best guess, all of you, when do you think construction demand comes back in a major way? Is it still possible late this year, or you think it's going to be deferred until next year as well?
The question is, when do we believe construction demand is going to come back?
This is Dan D'Amico. Both Mario and I will take a shot at this one. I think we're both in agreement that there will be no major turnaround by the end of this year in non-residential or residential construction. It will take several years for us to get back to strong levels of both of those two very important parts of our economy. And so you're looking more at a 2012, 2013 strengthening period. It will strengthen throughout that period, but it doesn't appear like it will get back to the previous or anywhere near the previous peaks until somewhere around mid-decade. Mario?
I'm full agreement with what Dan says. I would just add into construction the segment of infrastructure, though. That is something that certainly can transform the job-creating power of this country. It can happen quickly. There are ways in which that can be done, and this is an area where we're going to keep pushing for more focus, because that's an area that can generate, in a period of 2 years, potentially 2 to 3 million jobs. And you can imagine what that will do to the recovery that we so desperately need to strengthen.
Yes, over here. Could you state your name and organization, please, for the phone? Thank you.
I'll take a shot at it, and then we'll kick it off. What we have done was not an exercise in just cutting fixed costs.
Mario, could you grab the microphone?
Can you hear me?
Repeat the question for the people on the phone.
The question was, are we going to be able to preserve the improvements that were put in place in the balance sheet as we went through the recession? What we have done was a result of a very strong process, and it evolved improves in efficiency all across the board. It was not an exercise just in cutting fixed costs, and that can't come back easily to play a role in the cost structure as the recovery occurs. I'm confident that you're seeing very, very solid, much stronger companies in the steel business than we've ever seen before. And we should be able to benefit from what was put in place as we permeate all of these things in our products around the world, as a matter of fact, going forward.
It's John Surma. I'll just add a brief comment on that. I agree very much with what my distinguished colleague said, but if you take a look at today's cost structure for companies like ours versus any time pre-recession, take an average of 4, 5, 6, or 7 or something like that, and take a look at the major input costs, the carbon costs, coal and coke, and the ferrous costs are so dramatically increased from that time that our total cost for everybody that makes steel the way we do is much, much higher, and therefore the achievements we may have made during the very difficult time in the recession may not be all that evident and visible, but they're there. And I agree with Mario. I think we're going to do our best to keep them there. Interestingly enough, probably the only thing that's a big positive from a cost standpoint for us, if you go back to 2004, 5, or 6 to today, is what my distinguished friend just talked about, natural gas. Natural gas prices back at that time, and we're big gas consumers, were probably $10 an MMBTU, maybe more. Today, it's 5 or less. With the amount of gas we use, that's a real big improvement. So, but the overall cost structure, because of the cost of carbon and ferrous materials, is so much higher today that some of the changes we made in our fixed cost may not always be as evident.
Back to the phone.
Your next question comes from line of Sandy Shore from Associated Press. Your line is now open.
Good morning, gentlemen. I was just wondering about, since you brought up raw material costs, first of all, is the consolidation in the coal industry going to have an effect on your companies, the industry, and those raw material costs? And also, do you see them easing up anytime soon in the next quarter or 6 months?
The question is, will the consolidation of the coal industry have any effects, and do you see those effects, or do you see that easing up in the next 6 months?
Sounds like that's for me. It's John Surma again. I guess I'll take them in reverse. We don't do much forecasting of those kind of things. It's very hard, so I'll defer and encourage you to read what all the many skilled financial analysts say about that subject. There are some that are saying that carbon coal costs might trend down a bit just because of some of the impact of floods in Australia and elsewhere. I have no idea if that's true or not, but that's perhaps one possibility. And Tom, could you restate the first question?
The question was, what do you project the effects of consolidation in the coal industry to be?
That's also a matter that is subject to regulatory scrutiny by whatever the appropriate parties are, and I have to have some faith that there'll be an appropriate level of competition, and whatever happens is done. I don't particularly fear that. I think consolidation can be helpful, and that there are some synergies, and some of that flows into the market and some stays with those that take the risk. So I don't know that that's a particularly significant matter, but it's really too early for me to say that. I would just say that coal costs were high before some of the recent consolidations took place.
Thank you. Question in the room? Joe.
I had a question really in terms of strengthening steel exports
The question is projections on export expectations.
Well, export expectations are slanted towards the positive because of the relative strength of the U.S. dollar compared to a lot of global currencies. But I couldn't tell you what percent of that 95 million forecast is going to be exports. I know in case of Nucor, you know, we're looking to be somewhere between 10 and 15%, and we've been running somewhere around 11%.
Yeah, I'll echo what Dan said. For us, we were not exporters up until 3 years ago, and we've been doubling our level of exports every year since that period, and I believe that that's going to continue to move forward.
Back to the phone.
Your next question comes from Robert Matthews from Wall Street Journal. Your line is now open.
Hi, I just want to know, and if you could answer this one, what are your customers saying about steel makers implementing raw material price hikes or escalators within contracts?
Question is on raw material escalation in contracts.
Specifically iron ore and coal.
That sort of narrows the field to me, I guess, on that. And Robert, with respect, really there's nothing that we can, or at least I can say about that with respect to our company. That's a commercial matter. We, I think, acknowledge that we do have some commercial arrangements that have some cost-related adjustment factors in them. We've been saying that for a number of years now, and I would say that again today. But beyond that, whether there's an amount or anything like that, it's really a commercial matter of some value to us, and I'd prefer not to have it sort of any more widely discussed than that. So I understand your question, but with respect, that's the best I can do.
Robert, this is Dan D'Amico with Nucor. The situation with raw materials, unfortunately, this doesn't fall into the lap of iron ore and coal. It also falls into the lap of scrap metals, which both Mario and I are very sensitive to. And the hard reality is that when those prices are going up because of demand, in this case mostly global demand, because we export a lot of scrap to the tune of 25 million tons a year over the last couple of years, which is actually as much as Nucor would consume in a good year. That's put tremendous pricing pressure on that, and we have no choice but to pass that along to our customers. And thankfully, our customers have done a good job of passing those along, and I think you've seen some of the earnings reports coming out of a lot of our customers, and they've been pretty good. So no one likes to see prices going up, but the hard reality is as raw material costs go up, you have to pass that along to the end consumer.
Thank you.
Question in the room? Chris?
Yeah, another quick question about capacity. You guys have talked about it a little bit on your conference calls or earnings calls. There's new capacity coming online. There's old capacity coming back online. How do you see that impacting the marketplace, and can the market absorb that capacity?
Question is on the impacts of capacity coming online on the marketplace and the ability to absorb that capacity.
This is Dan D'Amico again. In a general sense, capacity is a problem when it falls to the category of overcapacity. That's determined by what's happening in the market with respect to the demand in the marketplace. And both of those things change on a regular basis. And where they end up, whether they end up in balance or not, is something that we'll see as we go forward. Yes, there's new capacity coming on stream over the next year or two. There's also some operations that are being restarted, but hopefully we're going to see some increase in demand not only here but around the world. And how that ends up playing out remains to be seen.
Question on the phone?
Okay, your next question comes from the line of Sonia Almquist from Bloomberg News. Your line is open.
Hi there. I was hoping you'd tell us what your forecast is for how much demand will increase this year, or how much the price of, say, hot-rolled coil will increase this year.
Well, we are going to stay a million miles away.
I'll restate the question. One we can answer. I think one will. What is the forecast on demand for this year? There was also a question on a verboten topic on forecast on pricing, which we don't discuss.
We won't be talking about pricing absolute levels. However, on the introduction, in our prepared remarks, I mentioned that we were looking at demand being for steel making, the production being on the order of 95 million tons, up about 14% from last year, and I guess you could just correlate that to an increase in demand of a similar amount.
Another question in the room. Joe?
I had actually a question that crisscrosses iron ore, scrap, and natural gas. And it was, heard in some respects determined by some remarks you made during your conference call. I've been around long enough to know that direct reduction has had its ups and downs, and it's been a rise for quite a while, but never quite a rise. I'm wondering with the availability, as you mentioned, of the shale gas, and what we're talking about, scrap prices not only driving today's steel prices, but being where they are, and then the export scenario. Does DRI have any life? And Dan, I know I'd just like to circle back and ask you about how you're making out your negotiations for iron ore for you and DRI.
For the benefit of those on the phone, the question is, has shale gas breathed new life into DRI technology?
Yeah, she directed the first part of that to you. Go right ahead.
If I remember it as Tom just described, I think what you recall from my comments recently is accurate. We think that the technology itself, I'm not an expert, but I think the technology is pretty proven and well developed. It's more a question of economics. And if I knew for sure what the forward curve was for 15 years on iron ore and natural gas, I can give you a really good answer, but I'm afraid I'm not quite that smart yet. But I think the availability of natural gas at these volumes, at these price levels, and given where iron ore is, and in our particular company's case, as I pointed out, the ability perhaps to use some iron ore from our own resource, that is potentially a very attractive combination, and we're studying that. As I said, I stressed on our call, and I'll stress it again today, it's conceptual in nature, but it probably wasn't something we thought about much when gas was coming in the gate at $11 MMBTU, but at 4 or 5, it has a much, much different economic impact.
This is Dan D'Amico with Nucor. As I mentioned many times in the last few months, and so is John and Mario and others, this whole situation with natural gas is a game changer. It's a game changer not only for the steel industry, but for the entire manufacturing sector and for our massive trade deficits on energy. The increased volumes and reserves that have been reported and portend more stable pricing going forward than we've seen in the past. Other issues that come up with respect to the uncertainty around setting a price on carbon in the world, or with respect to the availability of things like coking coal, which is in tighter supply than iron ore. All of these things add up to a different environment for DRI today than we've seen since it was first invented, basically, and developed and commercialized. So we certainly see that going forward. And again, it's predicated upon these situations with natural gas continuing to move forward in a positive way, and we believe they will. We do believe that that will be a very cost-effective way to make iron units, particularly for electric arc furnaces. And so, as we've announced, we have one plant that is currently under construction in Louisiana. We have plans to build upwards of 2, 3, or 4 of them in total. We already have one operating in Trinidad, which we've been operating for several years and has done very well. And your last question about what are we doing with respect to iron ore and obtaining iron ore resources. Currently, our strategy is to buy it on the global market. You know, if opportunities come up for us to be in an iron ore business, we'll certainly take a look at it.
Thank you. We will take one last question from the phone. Mario, I know that you may have to depart.
Okay, there are no further questions on the phone line.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank everyone for attending the press briefing and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.